my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, welcome to the first episode of 2023, which sounds absolutely insane to be saying. Happy New Year, happy holidays. Hopefully everybody had an incredible New Year holiday. Man, I feel like I haven't been here in a minute, even though it's only been 2 weeks, but it's nice to start getting back into the routine. I'd be lying if I said I got to rest a ton over the break. I got a little bit of rest in, but I still feel a little bit of that fog from the last year. But man, for me, these last couple of weeks, just spending a lot of time with family, and I got to go to Puerto Rico for a week, so that was beautiful. I would definitely say I am creatively recharged from the break. I just gotta maybe sneak in a couple naps to catch up on some of this tiredness that still is lingering around. But man, hopefully y'all are feeling good and you're excited. I'm excited to be back, and I'm excited for so many things, but I wanted to focus on one thing today. And I dropped a new podcast, and not like a new episode of this show, but an all new podcast. I had been teasing it on this show for I feel like a few weeks. It is officially out. It is a daily podcast called The Street Stoic, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I'm really passionate about this one, man, because it's like 2 years in the making, and it's an inspirational, like daily podcast, top like 15 minutes tops each episode. So it's really quick, kind of to help you get your morning started, give you that daily shot of inspiration is what we're calling it. And in it, I combine inspirational kind of hip hop lyrics and quotes along with the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, right? And I have mentioned Stoicism a ton on this show. I've referenced people like Ryan Holiday. And for me, I really want to kind of put my own take on it and bring something to our community and our culture that I feel like, isn't there and isn't available unless you're really looking hard for it or somebody puts you on, So that's the idea with the Street Stoic podcast. And man, I'm really excited. I hope you guys go and check it out. Go subscribe, go follow, go rate, help me out. We're building this new thing from the ground up. Life as a Gringo still continuing on as normal. This is just kind of an extension of myself, and I think something extra for y'all to be able to dive into and hopefully, motivate you and inspire you on a daily basis, and something short and quick that you can quickly kind of, ingest to help you get your day started. So the Street Stoic podcast, go check that out anywhere you find podcasts. And with that in mind, I kind of wanted to talk a bit about the creation of this podcast and also the mindset that I had, right? And it's a lot of kind of things I've talked about before, but the idea of if you don't see it, create it, right? Because for me, that is what happened with this podcast. And granted, it's been like an idea 2 years in the making, but for me, it was one of those things where I always question, why don't I see people like myself talking about this stuff? Why don't I hear people who sort of speak my language, so to speak, culturally, talking about this stuff, putting it in ways that sound comfortable and normal to me. And you have to get to a point where you stop asking the question of why I don't see it, and you become the person who in fact creates it. So I wanted to kind of just talk a bit about that on today's show. So we'll kind of talk about how I conceptualize this, a bit of my inspiration, and then we'll also kind of talk about one of the concepts that I focused on in the first episode of the show, which lends itself to this topic in general, and it's the idea of focusing on what you can control, right? This is, one of the kind of more foundational ideas of Stoicism. A concept that comes up a lot is essentially staying in your lane, right? So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll do that in our For the People in the Back segment. But I first wanted to kind of just start off with our Mi Gente segment today and talk a bit about, my inspiration for this and the importance of, if you don't see it, create it. So with that in mind, let's get into our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so like I had said, this idea, this concept is roughly like 2 years in the making, and that's crazy to kind of say. And let that be a lesson for anybody who is building something, creating something. These things don't happen overnight. Don't feel like you have to be in a rush to get your ideas out there, and that if you don't get it out there immediately, there's no point in doing it. Like, there's a lot of ideas and a lot of projects that I've been stewing on for a while that are just, coming to fruition, or aren't even really at the starting line yet, but I've been sitting on them for a minute, and just sort of, building until it seems like I have enough momentum, or I have the idea kind of, not perfected, but at least, well-rounded enough that I can show it to others, or conceptualize it, or bring like a rough idea of it to life. And that's kind of what happened with this podcast with the Street Stoic. I was conceptualizing this, and I can remember, I was in the car with my girlfriend, and I just kind of told her this concept, and she absolutely loved it. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna pitch it to my Cultura, who I already have my podcast deal with iHeart, and hopefully they'll like it. And I did that, and they did. They loved it. And I think the general concept of what I'm getting at here with this podcast, and why I kind of wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive on the show today, was because for me, I've always been super into the self-help stuff, right? Like, that's always been my bread and butter. Even before I was creating content like that, I personally was ingesting it all the time. And ironically, I thought that it happened when I started getting into like radio and people like Gary Vee, but I realized that I had always been into it even when I was younger, in my late teens. I had recently gone back to my parents' house, and I was like digging for an old laptop of mine, and I ended up finding, my parents are hoarders, by the way, so I couldn't find it in my basement, but I did find like a bag full of old notebooks and old books that I had been reading, and I realized, like, man, you've been on this self-help shit for a long time. Like I said, probably since I was like 19 years old, and it's been obviously incredibly impactful for me in my life, and it's been kind of the foundation, of keeping me going in an incredibly tough industry. But I think for me, there was always this void where I would be listening or reading, and sometimes on certain topics, I would feel like the person that is speaking to me just didn't quite understand my circumstances, or even just at the very simple, in the simplest way, didn't speak my language. And I think for me, I always kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And I was always super into people like Tony Robbins, who's like the guru of, the like the biggest name in motivational self-help stuff. And I always enjoyed his content. And somebody like Lewis Howes was a podcast that I got into for a while, The School of Greatness. But specifically, when talking about that person, Lewis Howes, and his podcast was hugely influential to me for a long time. It was something I listened to on a regular basis. But I can remember specifically over the pandemic, and then all that was happening around the murder of George Floyd, it became very clear to me that these people didn't know how to navigate the topic of conversation around race or ethnicity, right? And it became very obvious this is what was missing for me in the conversations that they were having. They couldn't necessarily relate to my point of view, my life story, or people like myself, right? People from my community and the things that they go through, and many times they are speaking from a place of privilege, and a privilege that I don't have, right? And a privilege that the people, many of whom listen to this podcast, don't have. And I'm sure a large sector of people who like self-help, who are of people of color, live with this disadvantage based upon their ethnicity, that these guys who do self-help, or these women, regardless of their own circumstances, most of them are white and had a privilege that we didn't have. And that's not to say that they're not qualified in what they do, or that the content they put out there can't be powerful for you. But like I said, for me, there was always something missing. And I think Life as a Gringo has been an amazing sort of introduction into that, for me, and to try to bring that to my community, and do it in a fun way, and do it in a way where we still talk about what's going on in the world, and we are on this journey of growing together. And I always say Life as a Gringo is a bit of like a sort of diary for me, so to speak, where I don't plan too much of like the episodes in advance. I kind of like sit down when it's time to record, and stew on, what's going on in my life, what sort of thoughts am I trying to work through, and recognizing that we're all universally trying to work through things. And if I'm going through something, I'm sure other people are going through the same thing, or at least something similar, or can relate to it at some point in their life, right? And obviously also trying to unite our community, and take away some of those nonsensical stereotypes and whatever things that it means to be Latino, right? All of the above. Life as a Gringo is like that all-encompassing thing where we touch on a lot of different things. But for me, I wanted to dive deeper into this world of self-help because, like I said, it's been so wildly impactful for me in my life. And I think anybody who has not been into this world, or not consistently participated in finding content that motivates you, or even beyond that, maybe you were like me and you were kind of a junkie for self-help, but still felt like something's missing. Like for me, it's important to provide that. And I think you look at any sort of like business, what do entrepreneurs say, or what do they do? They're solving problems essentially, right? And that's what this concept, when I talk about if you don't see it created, is, right? Like it's the idea that if you're yearning for something, there's probably other people out there yearning for the same thing, right? And we don't know how many people that might be, but you're definitely not going to be alone. And you think about how many weird like niches there are in the world. And I'm saying weird loosely here, but like there are literally people out there who, like, for example, love My Little Pony, and that is like a cult following, and they have fucking events all over the country and all over the world that people travel to like hang out with, and they dress up and they have certain music and this, that, and the third, right? And it sounds crazy to me, but like that basically started with somebody saying to themselves, I'm obsessed with My Little Pony. Like, and I don't have a community of people in my probably, neighborhood that are as obsessed with it. Let me create this group and see if I can connect with some other people. And sure and behold, you found others who were obsessed with My Little Pony, right? And that's a silly example, but I think it works for everything. And for me, it was like, okay, what is missing from the world of self-help and inspiration, and what have I currently been into, and what have I found to be the most impactful? And Stoicism has been that for me. When I was on the Breakfast Club, I got introduced to Stoicism through Ryan Holiday, who's been on the show a couple of times. He's an author. His book Stillness is the Key was really big and just inspiring, and all of his books are. I'm kind of a junkie for his books. I have most of them with the exception of the latest one, and I've been reading them, and they've had a huge impact on my life. But what I always ended up doing when I would hear people speak is I would feel like I had to reinterpret what they were saying to make it apply to me, or to put it in a language that made sense for me or made me receptive to it. So I realized that there's not a lot of people who are going to be doing the same thing, but I realized that not everybody's going to do that. Some people are going to see this white guy in Ryan Holiday who wears, Iron Maiden t-shirts, who, for anybody not following along, Iron Maiden is like a metal band from, I don't know if it's the 70s or 80s, but anyway, they don't look, he doesn't look like me, or probably the majority of the people listening to this podcast, right? But I always was able to kind of reinterpret the things he was saying and make it apply to my life. And then I thought to myself, well, there's so much inspiration in my own world and my own community and the things that I grew up around. I watch the documentaries on, musicians and specifically people in hip hop, and people like Diddy have always been very inspiring to me, and more recently, the late great Nipsey Hussle is somebody who has had a wildly profound impact on my life, for somebody that I have never actually gotten to sit down with. And I thought to myself, I'm being inspired by people like this. I know others are. Why not, combine the ancient philosophy that I think is probably the foundation for a lot of the inspirational concepts that we're talking about, and try and bring that to people, and maybe introduce them to something new, right? Because the idea of something like Stoicism is that it's existed for thousands of years, right? These are people who have existed long before, this country was even a thing, and their ideas have lasted, through the course of time. The books that they've written, the words that they have written, that they've spoken, have lasted, thousands of years, and it's for a reason. So there's something profoundly, inspiring about what the Stoics discussed and the way they viewed life. And it's, again, had a profound impact on me. And I wanted to be able to bring that to a different audience, to our community, our culture, and use it as a means to inspire and motivate further than my podcast maybe ever could, and that's kind of, again, the foundation of If You Don't See It, Create It. And I'm talking specifically about this podcast, the Street Stoic, and of course I want you to listen to it, but I want you to recognize that I'm just merely giving you an example of how I applied this into my own life, right? And that it's very easy for us to kind of say, and and a lot of people in my life would say things like this. I think my father in general, like, if it was that easy or if it was that good of an idea, why wouldn't somebody else think of it, right? And that's like a losing mentality. That's years of trauma of somebody being told no, essentially, right? But I feel like it's sadly an idea that many of us have adapted, that we believe that the best idea is already taken, or that if our idea was so good, somebody else would have thought of it already, right? And I think that I'm trying to push past that notion, right? That the reality is everything started as an idea, right? Somebody had an idea, they decided to go forward with it, and it may or may not have panned out for them, right? But it all started with an idea. There's still, holes in the marketplace, if you will, if you want to look at this from a business perspective. There's still innovations to existing products that could be made, and that's sort of what something like this is. Again, like, just because what you're looking for or what you feel like you're missing, you can't find it readily. Like, that doesn't mean, that it's a stupid idea or it's a stupid interest. It means actually you probably should be diving deeper into that, because you're finding a void in the marketplace, essentially, right? To bring it back to business, again, like, if you don't see it, create it, even if it's just creating it for yourself, right? Doesn't have to be, you don't have to be some creative who's doing this to make a living and to, produce content and this, that, and the third. Like, just merely for your own happiness. If something that you're looking for doesn't exist, just make it, and that's kind of what the story of this podcast is. Life as a Gringo started as that, right? And I didn't feel like I saw anybody in the Latin community speaking directly to me. And now here we are, second season in, I'm doing podcasting full time, right? I didn't see it, so I created it. Street Stoic is the same exact thing. I didn't feel like the world of self-help was speaking to me directly, so I had to create a concept that I felt like spoke to me and my upbringing and my community and much of the culture that we all grew up around in certain areas, or just pop culture in general, being born here in the States or growing up here in the States, right? Like, people love to tell you that your idea is dumb, it'll never work, who's that going to be marketed to, this, that, and the third. And then all of a sudden, when it works, everybody's congratulating you, patting you on the back, right? They thought Life as a Gringo was a stupid idea, and shit, some people still do, but here I am doing it, full time. Here I am touching people on a regular basis, building this community. I know you guys are out there. I hear from a lot of you on Instagram and in the comments or whatever it is in different places that you're checking out the podcast. Like, I know we're doing something real that is helping people, that is making people feel seen. So you can't allow yourself to get caught up in the naysayers or the negativity of people who are saying, like, who say shit like, oh, well, if it was such a good idea, somebody else would have done it. No, that's again a losing mentality. And those are the people who, when something comes out that is similar to an idea they had, they think to themselves, I had that idea 2 years ago. I can't believe it. Well, it's like, because you didn't take action on it, right? And we've all been there. By the way, I've had plenty of ideas that I never took action on. All of a sudden, I see somebody else fucking doing it, and I'm mad at myself, right? So don't allow yourself to get lost in the idea that, oh, you have this sort of mountain that you have to climb because nobody's ever done it before. Like, those are the things that generally make the biggest impact and lead to some sort of life-changing experience for you, myself included, when it comes to the world of podcasting with Life as a Gringo and now Street Stoic, continuing on that journey of climbing the mountain, not knowing exactly where the top is, but having the faith and knowing that, if I'm doing something that seems scary or people are unsure of or have never seen before, I'm probably on the right path if my goal is to make a large impact on my community and inspire them to think beyond, the four walls that they grew up in. or the limited ceiling that many of our families kind of placed over us in growing up. Now, with that in mind, I kind of want to dive into one of the concepts that I touched on in the first episode, the idea of focusing on what you can control, because I think it just goes hand in hand with this idea of if you don't see it, create it. So we'll do that in our For the People in the Back segment.
Say it louder for the people in the back. Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so on the first episode of the podcast, I focus on this idea of from Stoicism of focusing on what you can control, and in it I reference a couple quotes, I think from Epictetus and from Jay-Z and Brand Nubian, and I'm not gonna get super into the exact quotes because I want you to listen to the episode and you can kind of hear me in my flow state when it comes to diving into these ideas. But, pulling the quote from Brand Nubian, it was a song called Love Me or Leave Me Alone. They were talking about the idea that they are their own king, right? The bar is like, I am my own king. And I can't remember everything around it, but it's the idea that you are the one in control, essentially, right? Like you are the one in power. And in that, those lines that I reference, he talks about the idea of like, either you're going to follow me or not, but I'm doing what I do. Whoever follows me, essentially, right? And I referenced the line from Jay-Z, who I think borrowed from that song, and says, either love me or leave me alone, right? Like that whole concept of just sort of doing your thing and then letting the chips fall where they may fall, right? It's incredibly important because I think, just like I kind of referenced in when it comes to the negative people, when you're trying to conceptualize something that's never been done before and people are telling you, yo, you can't do that. Somebody else would have done it. Somebody smarter than you would have created that if it really was something people wanted to hear or see, right? And at the end of the day, you can't control what your parents think of your ideas, your friends, your spouse, the outside world. You can't control that, right? I can't control if I put out this podcast and nobody listens to it, right? Like there's only but so much I'm in control of. I can create the best content I possibly could. I can promote it to the best of my ability. I can make sure that, I'm showing up each and every episode on top of my game, and that my team behind me is releasing all the episodes on time and all of that stuff. But that's all that I'm in control of. I can't force people to go and hit the download button on the podcast app, right? And I can't force people to like the content that I'm putting out there. Even if I think it's incredible, that's where it ends, right? I can't convince you to fuck with what I'm saying. Either you do or you don't. And that is the central idea of focusing on what you can control. I think we're all so caught up in trying to control the outcome and to have a positive outcome that we forget that we're literally putting all our energy on the one thing that we don't actually have any control over, right? And then the product, the quality suffers. Our authentic self, is not stamped in the thing that we're creating as deeply as it should be, right? And as I've learned, as I've talked about here on this show, the more authentic I've become, the more vulnerable, the more I let people in, the more I find, others being drawn to me, the more success that I've found, right? And if I was worried about people judging me, and I have been, and that held me back for a long time, but currently, if I was worried about people judging me, if I was worried about, embarrassing myself, I wouldn't be making the sort of impact that I'm making. I wouldn't be building this community that we're all a part of right now. And I just think it's important to keep that in mind, right? Like you're only in control of but so much in this world and in this life. And then even beyond that, like revisiting that line, love me or leave me alone. Like, don't be a person who's trying to convince others to be a part of your life or be a part of what you're doing, right? And I say that as somebody who has done that for a very long time, where I had an idea of who is the quote unquote cool kids, the cool group that I wanted to be in business with, and that I wanted to, appreciate my art, the people that I was hoping would fuck with what I was doing. And I spent and wasted a lot of time trying to convince those people when there were other people around me who maybe didn't, uh, look like I pictured or come from the same background as I pictured or have the same interest or whatever it might be that I had created in my mind. They were actually fucking with me, and I wasn't giving them the attention that they deserve at the end of the day, right? And one thing that's coming to mind when 'cause I want to clarify what I'm talking about is like I can remember wanting to be a part of Steve Aoki's record label. Steve Aoki's a really big DJ, and they do like really kind of left of center music, and Diplo as well. Diplo had a record label, and like my goal was to work with either one of them. And I remember like just trying so hard to like format my music to sound like something they would fuck with, and I would be pitching it to them. I would always be heartbroken because people from that camp didn't get it, and I felt like I wasn't cool enough. And the reality was like, yeah, maybe they didn't get it, but I had other people who fucked with what I was doing. And if I just stayed in my lane and kept doing what I was passionate about rather than trying to bend, to somebody else's interest, I probably would have accumulated more of a following and enjoyed myself when it came to the music production process and I think DJing as a whole. And as a DJ now, I've kind of adapted that, and it's been incredible for me, and I get to play gigs that I actually love doing rather than ones that make me miserable but are the popular gigs, right? And I'm kind of going off on a tangent of this whole concept just because I think there's so much so much behind this idea of focusing on what you can control, right? And the last example I'll kind of give you specifically when it comes to Street Stoic is like I went through this imposter syndrome of being like, are people going to judge me as a Puerto Rican dude talking about hip hop, right? Like, are they going to tell me that I don't have any credibility, that I'm not the person to host this show? And whatever else comes along with it, right? And I had to like check myself, like I can't control that. There's gonna be people hating on me, There's gonna be people who feel like I don't have the credentials to do a show that has anything to do with hip hop, And at the end of the day, I can just focus again on what I'm in control of doing something that I love doing, right? Like I grew up loving hip hop. I know that I have a credential to speak on this because I know how inspired I've been by hip hop culture in general, right? And growing up around it as somebody who grew up in the New York area, So I know that I'm certified to speak on this, and at the same time, I'm just somebody who's passionate about it, regardless of my place in hip hop culture. I'm passionate about it. I'm listening to it. I get it. I'm inspired by it. So I'm going to speak on it, right? Like it's coming authentically to me. I love hip hop quotes. I love when people pull motivational quotes. I love listening to people like Nipsey Hussle and watching their interviews and watching people like 50 Cent's interviews and all of the above, right? And a part of me is still trying to convince myself and probably you right now that I have the credentials to speak on this, right? But that again, like had I have given into that self-doubt, I would have maybe never conceptualized this show to the point that it's now out and it's another thing I'm putting out into the world that I'm passionate about, that I get to do, that I enjoy, right? Like I would have deprived myself from, not only the joy of doing something that I love and speaking about things that I love, but even, in the most tangible sense, I would have denied myself another check, another way to build my generational wealth that I'm hoping to achieve. I would have denied myself that just because I was concerned with if other people would think that I wasn't qualified to speak on this. Like that's the most ridiculous notion to me as I say that out loud, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I'm fucking, Charlemagne or DJ Envy or Ebro or anybody who's like, certified hip hop royalty like DJ Drama, whoever. Doesn't matter if I'm them. They're still going to have haters who hate on what they're doing and tell them that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, right? And they're the most qualified people in this. I can say that from working at the Breakfast Club. You still had people who told them they didn't know what the fuck they were talking about, even though they've been on the air for 10 plus years at this point and are amazing at what they do, right? So you can't allow that fear of what others may say or may think to slow you down or to stop you. That's kind of the gist of what I'm saying here. And that's another example of focusing on what you can control. I cannot control the reception of certain people, the hate, the opinions of other people. I just can control, doing something that I enjoy, doing it to the best of my ability, and putting it out there to the world. Those are the only things of this that I can control. And that's what I'm staying focused on rather than wasting my energy on a bunch of shit that I can never change and a bunch of people whose opinions or minds I'll probably never change, right? So that's just a concept I wanted to touch on, give you, I guess, a taste of the show, but also tie in the idea of if you don't see it, create it. I know I've talked about this before, but I thought it was kind of a good time to brush up on that concept. It's kind of one of the fundamental commandments of life as a gringo, I feel like. Now, with that in mind, no Ask a Gringo on today's show. I'm coming off that vacation fog a little bit, y'all. I forgot to do Ask a Gringo. We'll do it for next episode for sure. But with that in mind, man, let's kind of tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so I apologize if this episode felt like any sort of shameless self-promotion. Obviously, I want you to go listen to the new podcast, but I also thought it was a great moment to sort of bring you into my life a bit. And I think one of the beautiful things about life as a gringo and what I hope you're getting out of it, and even if you're just, listening to the podcast or you follow me on social media, whatever it is, what I create, what I hope you're getting out of it is like an open door into somebody who is going through a lot of the same shit as you, but trying to push themselves past it, trying to be a high achiever, trying to chase their dreams, trying to live their best life, and I love to kind of give you an open insight into the good, bad, and ugly of that, right? The struggles that I go through chasing that. I don't want to be one of these people who, pushes these ideas of a perfect life and thinks that, you think that once you begin to do the things you love, that you're no longer have any sort of self-doubt and you no longer are unhappy at times and things like that, right? And that's the goal of episodes like this one, is to kind of really let you know my whole creative process and even where I'm at now and the insecurities that I have and the things that come up for me. And hopefully that motivates you to push yourself to chase after the things that you want to do. And I think the beautiful thing about this podcast is that you guys are growing with me, as the show grows, right? Like we're building something that has never been done or seen before. And I get to connect with a lot of you on social media who hit me up at DJ Dramos. I love talking to y'all, and I'm building some things. I'm planning on some things that we can connect even further beyond just the podcast, beyond just social media. But, we're all on this journey together of personal growth and development and trying to build a better life for ourselves and our family. And I always want to be able to bring you in on how I'm doing that to hopefully motivate or inspire you and again make you feel a little bit less alone if that is the case, And I think that this concept that we're talking about today, if you don't see it, create it, like that has to be something that runs through your head. Like I want that to be ingrained in you because it's something I've begun to ingrain in myself, where at the moment I realize I'm looking for something and I don't find it, I tell myself, if you don't see it, create it, right? And that like motivates me to be like, this is something I need to dive deeper into because I don't see anybody else doing it, but I know if I want it, if I'm looking for it, there has to be some other people out there who want the same, right? And that's what Street Stoic is. That's what life as a gringo has been. That's what a lot of the things that I'm working on right now are. And also, again, trying to remind myself to just focus on what I can control, right? To stay in my lane, to not try and convince everybody to love me, right? And I think that has been one of the biggest struggles of my life. And I think if I can push you towards one concept to really take away from everything we're talking about, is don't waste time on people who don't fuck with you or who don't get your vision, who don't want to get your vision, Like, it's a waste of time trying to convince them. And trust me, one day they will probably come around once you're successful and your shit has done everything you said it would. All of a sudden, they're going to be telling people how they knew you, right? But in the meantime, it's not worth having their energy around you. Like, again, Jay-Z, love me or leave me alone. Like, we're all so focused on trying to convince people of our value, of our worthiness, that we end up, missing what's directly in front of us, missing the people or the opportunities that lie right in front of us that would bring us an incredible amount of joy and happiness. I mentioned this in the first episode of Street Stoic, but and this is like a business thing, but I think it applies in real life, where the writer Kevin Kelly talks about that a creative artist really only needs 1,000 true fans to have a successful career that, pays their bills and provides them a comfortable living. And I dive deeper in that in the podcast if you want to hear about it. I think, I don't know if I've talked about it on Life as a Gringo. It all begins to blur a little bit, but definitely Street Stoic episode 1, I talk about this concept a bit deeper. But again, it's the idea of quality over quantity, right? And at the end of the day, understanding that you can never convince somebody who doesn't want to do something, right? And we waste a lot of energy, a lot of time trying to do so, be it romantic partners, trying to convince somebody to love you, trying to convince a job to see your value, trying to convince your parents to support you, whatever it is. We waste a lot of time and energy trying to convince people. And at the end of the day, we just need to start focusing on creating and building what we want to see. And eventually people will come around, or we will find the audience who has been looking for the same exact thing that we've been kind of salivating for. And that's what I'm trying to build with Street Stoic. That's what we've built with Life as a Gringo, and the My Little Pony community built that with hold on, I'm actually going to look this up real quick. What they call the fans who bronies is what they call them. And this is a real thing. It's actually like a documentary about this, and it's adult fans of My Little Pony. And I don't know why this is such a profound example for me. I think just because it's something I do not fucking get whatsoever. And if you watch any videos online about it, it is the strangest thing. I can't remember where I originally saw this. I think somebody told me about this. But it just goes to show you, man, don't be afraid to try and put yourself out there for the things that you're interested in, no matter how weird they may be, because there's a fucking audience for everything out there, right? There's a community, a group of people, like-minded individuals for every weird idea, fetish, concept, whatever it is that you have. There's a community out there for you if you look hard enough and you actually begin to take action on your interest. And yeah, I guess the bronies, the My Little Pony stands are the essence of what I'm trying to push with this idea of if you don't see it, create it, and also focusing on what you can control. They look ridiculous, right? There's no way around that, but they can't control my opinion. All they can do is, indulge in the thing that they love and then find their community as a result, right? I think that's what we're all searching for in our own way. I don't know what the fuck I was just talking about, to be quite honest with you guys. I had a weird train of thought on that, but I hope that I encapsulated everything in this episode. I hope that you guys go check out the Street Stoic podcast. I'm really excited about it. Like I said, it comes out Monday through Friday, every single day. They are roughly between 10 to 15 minutes long, really quick episodes, just like a daily shot of inspiration for you to start your day. And I would love to hear what you think about it. As always, man, if you can go subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, rate it, review it, all that stuff, leave some comments. That is wildly helpful, especially right now as I'm trying to build this up as my team, the whole iHeart My Cultura family is trying to build this up right now. It is incredibly important that you can help us out in that way of rating it, subscribing, reviewing it, all that good stuff. I would greatly appreciate it. And man, that's it. The Street Stoic, wherever you find podcasts, Monday through Friday, quick little shots of inspiration for you to start your day. And I'd love for you guys to check this out. And I appreciate you checking out Life as a Gringo. Y'all have been amazing. Feels good to be back. I'll see y'all on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode. Until then, stay safe, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.